Hey guys, this is Shay Jose, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to master your stereo bus. This is the way I do it, and I've been mastering a lot of my own work over the last couple of releases. So I'll give you a little bit of an insight into how I actually master my stereo bus. I've got another video where I actually cover the mixing process, which I'll link up here. But for now, what I'll do is just cover how we actually master a track ready for release on streaming services such as Beatport, Spotify, and Apple Music. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so over here we have a brand new track that I've been working on, which is not released yet, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to actually have a look at how I go about mastering from start to finish. So I thought we'd look at how to actually take a stereo bus and look at mastering this if you're doing it for yourself, and some of the things that you need to be aware of before you actually complete the process and actually submit these for streaming services. So let's get started. So the first thing is basically making sure that your track, before we even actually start anything, and I've covered this before in another video, I use something called RX Audio, and if you haven't got this, it's a great plugin. It's a little bit overwhelming when you first start using it, but I've been using this more and more. And what I will do is actually just import my track, which I've done here, into RX Audio, and come down here to the bottom right hand corner and click this face button here. So what this will do is actually look at adjusting the phase alignment of the track. Usually what happens is if the track is not in phase, when you go start adding some processing like compression, some limiting and stuff like that, or clipping, what it can do is the processing that you do can read incorrectly, and it can add some unwanted clipping and basically take away some of the headroom that you could have used as part of your track. So I'm not sure if there's any other plugins out there that can actually do this. I just use RX because it's simple, and all you would need to do is just import your file. What you would do is just hit this suggest button over here, and it will go through its thing. I'm not going to do it now because I've already phase aligned this particular stereo bus, and once it finishes, just hit render. Once you've got the rendered file, you actually need to re-export it. So what you would do is just come up to file and just do export, and export it as the type of file that you want and the bit depth. What I would suggest is just a WAV file in 24-bit. Quite simple. There's a lot more that you can do in RX. For example, looking at the spectrum analyzer and checking what sections are producing more loudness. It also gives you the peak loudness meter of the entire track, but I won't delve into that. That's probably a separate video. Once that's finalized, I will usually just import my track straight into my DAW. And the first thing I'll probably do is just making sure that I check kind of the levels of where this is sitting at. And basically just take a look at probably one of the loudest parts in the track, which is around the drop actually. That's because I've produced this track, I kind of know where it's one of the lightest components, or just before the exit, which is, we've got some high peaks around here. So what we do is just take an average readout of where this track is actually sitting at the moment, to give us an indication of how loud or how quiet this track actually is. So let's have a quick listen. So we've got around minus 16, minus 17 integrated LUFS there. If we take another couple of readings around the track, maybe just on the drop here, to get an idea of where it's sitting at. I might just minimize this a little bit more.
I'm just creating space for what is still to come.
So very similar. So it's sitting around the minus 16.5 integrated LUFS. I think around minus 10 RMS, which I saw. And we'll just take one final reading.
I'm just creating space for what is still to come.
So yeah, so basically minus 16 to minus 17 is roughly where we're sitting at the moment. That's the first part. So we've kind of looked at it. We kind of know roughly where the song is sitting at the moment. For first cab off the rank, I tend to use this from time to time, depending if I want to get a type of coloring on the track itself. For this track, I really liked how the midsection of a track called 7 Days that's been on the Beatport charts at the moment, how it was actually mastered. But the top end was a little bit too tingy for my liking. So the Ozone Match EQ is great because it actually allows you to move these parameters on left and right and adjust the smoothing and the amount of the EQ curve. So if you don't know how to use it, quite simply, you would put two files in here. You'll put 2 tracks individually in here. So you open up another audio track, you put another track in here. And what you would do from here is simply just go to the Ozone 10 EQ, solo the track given, and hit capture. Vice versa, then you will do the same thing on the other track, and then it gives you a comparison of each one of the waveforms. Obviously, because of copyright, I don't want to actually put the other track in here that I used, but that's basically the general gist. Now, the amount, as you can see there, will actually change how much EQ is actually applied. So I'm only applying, I think, about 16%. And the smoothing basically is how smooth those lines will be in the EQ. Usually around 40 to 50% is a good indication. But like I said here before, I've actually just adjusted the curves because there is a massive basically boost around 7K there, which was just sounding horrible to me. So I'm basically just looking at kind of like the mid to low mid frequencies. Once that's done, the next thing I will usually do is just add an EQ. Now, what I would do is just look at the play the track and essentially loop a section of the track, which I know is quite busy, which is basically the drop in here, and make some slight adjustments. So if we take a listen, so what I've done there is I've picked a couple of frequencies which are really standing out to me, and the main and most important thing here is that I actually put these EQ in linear phase. The reason being that if you're using an aggressive cut like I am using here, sometimes what you can do is if you're not using the equalizer in linear phase, you can add a slight bump point of the cut. So essentially, even though we're rolling a lot of this stuff off here around 19 hertz, if I don't have plugin Dr. But what you'll find is it actually puts a slight boost like this on the other side. So by using a linear phase EQ, you're actually limiting that to a large degree, so you don't get these kind of unwanted peaks going forward. The other thing I'm doing is just boosting around the fundamental, or the second fundamental here, which this track is in Gs, which is around 95 hertz. And doing some cuts around 190, 280, and 392, which I kind of found were really bothersome in my ears when I listened to it. And also, I went a little bit too berserk on the excitement there in the high end. So I had to actually drop down and tame some of those peaks, usually around the 7K mark. So I'll let you hear this with, and then we'll go through each one of the bands so you can hear the differences there. So just adding a little bit more punch in there. There's a little bit of resonant frequencies there. So what usually happen also is when you start cutting around this area, around the, I guess, lows and mid-lows, you actually open up the top of your mix a little bit more. And vice versa, when you start cutting out a little bit of the top, you open up your mix a little bit more towards the low and mid-lows. So what I really wanted this track was to be more, or the style that I was going for was to be a little bit more mid-range present. So by doing this, not only was I taming some of those harsh frequencies, but I also managed to free up a lot of space here around between 390 or 400 hertz to about 5 hertz, which is basically the meat of the song, right? Where a lot of the synths are actually playing. Moving on, we added some slight compression, but essentially what I wanted to achieve with this was making sure that we had the right compression rates in order to be able to make sure that the compressor was acting in a full cycle revolution of the lowest fundamental in the track. And now I know that's a mouthful, but basically what that, in layman's terms, what that really means is to make sure that the compressor was acting and allowing the lowest fundamental of the track to pass through before the compression was applied. Basically, so you don't get any pumping in the track. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to use an equation. So what we do is just figure out what the lowest fundamental is of the track in order to dial in our attack and release thresholds. So I've already found that what that was, which was 56 hertz. So the equation that we will use is 1 divided by 56, which will give us roughly 0.018. And then we convert that into milliseconds, which will give us 80 milliseconds. So what we did in here is basically just dialed in the attack at 80 milliseconds and the peak release at 80 milliseconds. And by doing so, I'll basically allow you to have a listen to how that actually sounds. So if I was just to turn this on, and we'll set this to delta, so we can just hear the difference. So as you can hear there, it's taming the kick or the low end, but allowing the rest of the track to kind of actually filter through. So basically giving us a flatter signal, which is a more a less aggressive type of compression. And if we A/B that, okay, now that we've set our attack and release times, the other important thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that the input signal, or the loudest volume that we've actually put in through the compressor, has to be compensated when it's exiting the process. To make sure that we're actually not just adding volume, but making sure that the compressor is actually acting the way we expect it to act. So basically what we'll do is we just play the this section here, this loudest section that we've got here in the track, and we'll just monitor kind of the peak levels and then have a look and adjust the makeup based on that. So let's have a quick listen. So around 12.5 is roughly what we're going for there. And now when we turn on the compressor, let's have a listen to see where those levels are actually sitting at. Around about the same place, around minus 14.5. So basically now that tells me that we need to do a makeup gain here of 2 dB. And now when we apply the makeup gain, roughly now sitting, we now should be sitting at the same volume level that we had before. So that's great. So that basically is now setting my compressor to allow that low end to come through. We're not introducing any unwanted distortion because it's allowing that lowest fundamental frequency to go one full revolution before the compressor is actually applied. The peak crest, the ratio, I'm using one that's quite low, and the threshold is just kind of adjusted to taste. So we're hitting, I think, roughly about 2 dB gain reduction. So that's our compressor setup. The next thing we'll do is actually, I set up a parallel chain as well, which I've only just kind of started doing these recently, where if I take out the utility and take out the clipper, we're basically just adding a little bit more parallel compression to the signal here. We're using a higher compression ratio, quite a hard knee, and we're reusing the threshold quite a bit. So we're really kind of squashing this signal to make sure that we're actually getting the volume that we actually want. So now adding this parallel compression, just need to make sure once again that we're doing some gain staging here. So basically if we just run this compressor, and we'll kind of have a look once again at the peak level and then measure it out. So we've got about minus 11 there. And now we're roughly sitting at about the same volume. So what we've done is just put a utility plugin in here and then just slowly introduce some more or reduce some of the gain. And we can actually add either by utility plugin, or you can do it by the actual volume introduction in here as well. So if we run this again, so it's roughly around the same volume. You can add a little bit more, but it's a little bit trickier to get quite right. But it's about trying to equate the volumes of the parallel compression that you're actually trying to put in. If we move on to the master chain, what I ended up doing later on here was actually just adding a Pultec EQ. Now I found that the kick, while I did like how the kick was sounding, I felt that the kick needed a little bit more presence. So what I ended up doing is just attenuating just around 30 hertz. So basically a pretty large slope towards the bottom end of around 3.5 dBs, and attenuating that at about 2.5, could probably go about 3. To basically give that low end a little bit more power. But while doing this, you're actually increasing the low end. But one of the cool things about using this is you then can add it into a multiband compressor as well. So what we're really doing is we're increasing the signal kind of like this, but we're actually then taming or squashing that added volume level into a multiband compressor to really kind of squash that low end to actually give more density to that low end as it plays through. So this is kind of like a two-prong approach that you will use. So I'll let you hear these two before and then after. So this is without it. Now at the that kick really coming through. It's probably a little bit too overpowering. And now we tame it with a multiband. And we're still sitting at around the 12 RMS. So that little change there just gives that kick a lot more presence coming through on the mix. But we're also controlling the dynamic of that, so it's not skewing the overall balance of the stereo file. Moving on, what I added to these was a little bit more compression. So what I've done is, because I'm actually using the Fat Filter Pro MB to control that low end, I didn't really want to touch the low end, so to speak, and I wanted the mid-range of this track to sound really tight, and I've actually left the sides quite loose. And shiny, I guess you could call it, only because I really wanted that line to be really tight to sound in a club system to sound really tight. So what we've done is here we've got 4 bands. We've turned off the first band at around 127, turned on the first band with some slight 2-to-1 compression. It's not a very hard knee, and then we made the next band comes in at about 1K. The ratios increased a little bit more, but we're only using about 60% of compression in there, so between the wet and the dry signal. And last but not least, we're actually squashing this a little bit more and using the same sort of ratio in here. So I'll give you a listen to each one of these bands so you can see what that sounds like. Once again, the thing that you actually need to be aware of here is that you gain match these. So we don't want to start introducing unwanted volume changes. We want to make sure we control the frequencies in the stereo bus rather than increase the volume at this stage. We moved on. I added a little bit of imager, which is basically just how much stereo width I wanted in the track. So around the 200 hertz range, I just monoed everything. Especially for club tracks, you really want that low end to be kind of monoed. Added a little bit of stereo width around the 200 to 800 hertz range. a little bit more between 812 and 6K, and a little bit more just above 6K. So it's not a hell of a lot, only about 8, 11 and 12% in here. So I'll let you hear it with and without. Once again, we're doing some gain staging there. If we move on, so the next plugin in the chain, Ozone again, we are now using some exciter. And what I wanted to do was actually, the reason why I left the sides a little bit without having any compression on it was because I wanted to actually add some excitement or some distortion on the sides only. So we've added this exciter here, and once again, I'm only just really doing that kind of mid-range and anything from like 4K upwards. Just adding a little bit of analog distortion to each one of these bands. So once again, I'll let you hear what that sounds like. This is with. And without. And as you can tell, I'm only doing very slight tweaks in each one of these processes. Once again, we're gain staging the volume here to make sure we're not introducing, louder will always sound better, but you will see that when you introduce little bits of parallel processing in each one of the chains, a little bit goes a long way. Moving on, I added another EQ, just another fat filter here, where I actually did some more cuts and a little bit of a boost here around the 373 Hertz, and a little bit of a boost around 118, which I think it just needed a little bit more body. So play that for you here. So some harsh frequencies that were really still coming through again. And I really wanted to control those hi-hats, so what I did is I just added a dynamic EQ here to kind of control them as they came through. And added a little bit more low end in here. So moving on, we added everything through a clipper, just doing some soft clipping here with some oversampling. Now you can use standard clip or free clip, that kind of both quite good actually. I find free clip and standard clip are probably the best low cost clippers. I think this one's even free from memory. Just add a little bit of clipping before we actually start passing this through to some other processing. So moving on from here, we added a de-esser. The reason why I added a de-esser was, once again, I just felt that high end was still a little bit too, sounded a little bit too distorted for my liking. So we added a de-esser just kind of to control that high end. And I think I've set these from about 12K up. So I'll let you hear it with and without. So the de-esser is a great way to actually help kind of tame some of those high-end peaks and some of the distortion that can happen as well. We ran these through the first limiter. This is just to add some volume now to the track after some of that processing. I like to use the IRC3 balanced option. Also, the crisp is actually quite good, but I felt this actually sounded quite well, or quite good actually, with this algorithm here. Moving on, I added once again a little bit more multiband compression. This time, once again, we're just on the extreme sides of the track. As I mentioned before at the very start, I really want to concentrate on that mid range to have kind of like a flat, sort of really present sort of mid range rather than really high end, shiny sort of mix. But the low end actually needed a little bit of work as well. So what I ended up doing is actually just looking for where the kick was sitting, because I still felt like the kick needed to come through a little bit more. And what we'll do is we'll just solo this section here. And in this section, what I've done is basically just use an expander to bring the kick out a little bit more. So really narrow bands here, sitting at around, I think between, where was he sitting around? Between 56 to about 120, which is around where the kick is sitting. Set it to expand mode. Set the ratio quite high in the knee to a hard knee as well. The attack and release quite low, and then just set about 3 dB to make that kick really come through. Similar to the top end, I ended up controlling this a little bit more because, once again, as I said before, when you add bottom end, you actually lose a lot of the top end. But this top end was coming through so loud that I actually felt like I still needed to tame it. So I just added another band here to kind of control and tame those high frequencies. Once again, I lowered the volume a little bit just to make sure we're still sitting around that negative 12 RMS value. Moving on, item on the chain was another limiter. So I used the Ozone Vintage limiter. I really like how this sounds. And I chose the analog algorithm here because I just like the way it sounded. So we're just doing a little bit of limiting here to bring that volume. So I'm only getting about 1 or 2, about 1 dB to half a dB of gain reduction there, of limiting, I should say, sorry. So what we've done essentially here is by clipping the signals earlier in the chain, it's actually going to allow us to get more headroom coming forward. Now, I could have actually moved the Pro MB out before the first limiter, but it sounded okay to me in the chain. So there's no fast or hard rule as to how you should be doing things. But I just found that this was giving me a better sounding mix overall. We go through our third limiter. I like to actually limit in stages, so then that way I'm not pushing one single limiter all the way to the end. We just run the transparent EQ, the transparent algorithm here, and we're making sure that we're just adding about 172 milliseconds of attack and release. Now, the Pro Alto is a bit funny. If you have a really aggressive attack, it acts more as a clipper. If you add a really heavy, a really slow attack, it can add more. It can react more as a limiter. So what I wanted to do is just have basically just chop some of those peaks off once again that were coming through before we actually added a little bit more of a transparent sound. So I'll let you hear this with and without. And if you put this little headphone down here, you can actually hear what it's actually chopping off. So it's just kind of clipping those peaks at the top there. I've used some oversampling in here as well before we go into the second limiter. And we're using the punchy algorithm in here. Once again, let you hear what this kind of sounds like. So if you were to move the attack all the way to the right, you can actually hear it's really aggressive. But if we dial this back down, now with the release, as you can hear there, it's pumping quite a bit if the release is really short. And I think this sounded quite nice to me in here. And then it was just about adjusting the gain to make sure we're getting about maybe 2 dB, 3 dB, yeah, 3 dB of gain reduction. that's it, guys. That's the processing that I do when I actually master a stereo bus. Like I said, it's not a one size fits all. This is just kind of one of the ways that I do things. Sometimes I'll use even less processing depending on the track or the style that I'm going for. So if you enjoy this or you got some benefit out of this, I'll appreciate you if you give the video a like and share it and comment below. It helps the algorithm out. And until next time, I'll see you around.